It's Tuesday, October 15th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast presented by Spectrum. It is a hell of a day to talk ball. But before we dive into the People's Panic Meter, as we always do, we need to have a little improper conversation about Monday Night Football because that was, oh my God. I mean, it was I don't want to just go right into the officiating because you guys know I'm never that guy. But man, most penalized game of the season. Just over 200 yards of penalties in this game. Just officials, get the hell out of the way. Get the hell out of the way. Come on. We did not turn on these games to see you guys. That is the way it felt on Monday night. That was very frustrating because otherwise, Bills 23, Jets 20 was a pretty fun football game. Let's start on the Bills side where pretty much same old in the passing game. We got some pretty cool Josh Allen plays in this one. He threw a heater downfield to Curtis Samuel. You guys know that lit my fire there. Dawson Knox does his best Dalton Kincaid impression, gets into the end zone. But really the story of this game is Ray Davis in the backfield. We got news pretty much as late as possible that James Cook, despite thinking he was going to play on Friday, was not going to play in this game. He was out with his toe-foot injury that he's dealing with right now. That allowed the buck to pass to Ray Davis, who had 20 carries, 97 yards on the ground, and also chipped in with 3 for 55 as a receiver, including a 42-yard missile that he caught downfield from Josh Allen on a scramble drill. Can't believe he hauled that pass in. That was pretty electric stuff from Ray Davis. Ray Davis also ran a route on 33% of the dropbacks, pretty much just keeping Ty Johnson in kind of a complimentary reserve role. You know, this was one of those games, I'll be honest with you guys, as a fantasy analyst, where in this particular situation, I didn't get a lot of questions before the game, and I don't really love to answer like sit questions or this take guy or that guy, because as you guys know, I make suggestions, you make decisions. These are your teams. You should be the one making these calls and being out there deciding what you should do with your own team. So I try not to do much of that stuff anyways, but getting the question of like Ray Davis or Ty Johnson, I saw some other people with strong takes about this. I had no idea what the hell was going to play out in this game. You know, I definitely had a feeling that Ray Davis is the more talented back than Ty Johnson. I liked Ray Davis as a prospect. He checked a lot of boxes. I've talked about this on the show before, that he seems to fit exactly what they were looking for in Damian Harris as the complementary back to James Cook last year. They also signed Latavius Murray last year. Davis runs hard. You saw that all night long against the New York Jets. He just was a bully out there. It feels like exactly what they need in this Buffalo Bills backfield, especially because, as we've detailed a lot on the show with Nate Tice, this team is a man gap duo heavy run team, and Davis is just a perfect fit for that. So in my mind, I thought Davis would probably be just the guy you'd want in replacement of James Cook, but you know, a lot of other people pointed out that Ty Johnson he had more plays. He was on the field more. He was on the field in more critical situations. Honestly, I think it could have potentially gone either way, but Ray Davis just got hot immediately, had over 40 rushing yards in the first drive alone. The guy just played extremely well. And, you know, sometimes we roll our eyes at the hot hand stuff. I believe that that's what happened here with Ray Davis and the Buffalo Bills. I don't know that they set in here thinking like we're going to hand the ball off to Ray Davis 20 times, but the young man earned it again and again and again and again on Monday Night Football here. And the biggest takeaway for me on this is I think it's just an absolute 0% chance, no chance that Ray Davis just isn't a factor now going forward. I think this performance was too good, and he is too much of exactly what the Bills need in their backfield to complement James Cook, who's a really good back, but he's not a true feature back. He doesn't have that type of size. He's not exactly a tackle breaker, a grinder back like Ray Davis is. I think Ray Davis is not going away. So, you know, I said it on the Sunday show about like Tyler Algier and just, hey, if you can't handle another back taking carries away from a running back, don't play fantasy football in the year 2024. I think we're chalking up James Cook as another one of those guys, just like Breece Hall on the other end of this thing. Like if you're annoyed by Braylon Allen at this point, you got to get over it because Allen has earned playing time. And I think now at this point, Ray Davis has earned playing time. I think we'll continue to see him when James Cook is back on the field. In the meantime, if you have him, he's definitely a guy you're starting while James Cook is out. Looks like a really good player, and the Bills' run game is extremely good. So I don't think Ray Davis is going away. I'm just looking up the Bills' schedule right now, and this is a team that, again, are coming off a win against New York. It's not a great matchup of Week 7 against the Tennessee Titans if Ray Davis has to start there, but Seattle in Week 8, Miami in Week 9, Indy in Week 10. I don't know that James Cook is going to be out that long if he was really truly close to playing in this game, but there will still be some spots if James Cook takes a little bit of a backseat where Ray Davis might make sense as a fantasy option. Really excited by what we saw from him in this offense. Let's move on to the Jets side here. It's a shame the way it ended for the Jets offense because, man, I mean, that was just a tough throw for Rodgers there. But this is definitely the best. It's the best he's looked in the Jets uniform to me. And who knows, man? Like, again, talk about something we just don't know. Nathaniel Hackett being ousted, Todd Downing being in. I have no idea, right? I think it's easy to say, okay, best offensive performance. It's obviously because they got Hackett out of the mix. Yeah, sure. You get an adult in the room and Todd Downing, who has never really called a high-end NFL offense before, to put it kindly. But, maybe he just has experience on the job. He has experience with just running professional offenses where Hackett at this point, we've just never seen him do that. We've never seen him call like an offense that's not in the league basement, basically, at this point. So I think that maybe it's an upgrade there. But regardless, this is a matchup where we knew two things were going to be true. We knew that if they could protect Rodgers, there's some holes in this Bills secondary. It's a good group. The safeties played extremely well to end the game, especially shout out to Taylor Rapp, who just, I mean, what a hit he put. A couple of big plays from Taylor Rapp in this game, but especially the pass he broke up to Jeremy Ruckert. That was an electric play. The interception to end the game there for Teron Johnson. I thought it was an awesome game from the Bills secondary, but there are some spots you could pick on in that intermediate area, and especially over the middle of the field, if you can block it up. And when the Jets blocked it up, which was not often, Rodgers took some absolute shots in this game. You saw them actually able to get the ball over the middle of the field in that area where I've talked about that Garrett Wilson has not been activated this year. You actually saw them get that done. 10 targets for Garrett Wilson, 8 catches, 107 yards, and a touchdown. I think Garrett Wilson, wide receiver 1 season, is back on track. Obviously, Allen Lazard catches the Hail Mary. Unbelievable the Jets lose this game with Rodgers throwing that Hail Mary. That's unfortunate. But, Allen Lazard continues to be a factor in this offense. Don't think Mike Williams is about to take Allen Lazard's job anytime soon. The other thing we knew about the Jets offense in this game is that they were going to be able to run the ball. And it was extremely refreshing to see, Jeff Ulbrich come into this game and say, hey, we are going to establish the run. We're going to be a run heavy team. They got the ball to Breece Hall. 18 carries, 113 yards, 6.3 yards per carry. Braylon Allen chips in with 3 for 8. He did have a touchdown called back. And honestly, you could do the whole, this guy got a play called back. This guy got a play called back all night long for a bunch of these players. It was one of those games where I don't think anybody can come out of it. Like, my team really got hosed by the officiating. I think a lot of players and both teams got hosed by the officiating in multiple instances here. But again, it's nice to see Breece Hall get back on track. He also chips in with 5 for 56 as a receiver. Is it going to be perfect sledding ahead for the New York Jets offense? I don't know about that. Their season obviously is on the line here as they fall to 2-4. They get a game against Pittsburgh in Week 7. That's going to be definitely a tough defensive test. I'm not looking forward to seeing Tyron Smith try to block like TJ Watt and these guys, because that was there was some troubling tackle play from the New York Jets in this one. But still, I think we're kind of back on track with Garrett Wilson especially. And Breece Hall, I think, is looking like still a clear-cut RB1. Not too panicked on that one. On that note, let's fire up Dalton Del Don here. Let's throw it to the people's panic meter coming out of Week 6. Let's get into it. Joining me now is my good friend, the man himself, Dalton Del Don. Dalton, what's going on, buddy?
Not much, Harmon. My daughter had to sit out 3 weeks of racing with a swollen knee, but she returned Saturday and won it. So we have the finals coming up this weekend. So things are good. Daughter's feeling healthier.
Well, good. Injuries are ruining us in fantasy football. They can't be ruining your daughter's racing career too. I mean, give me a break. This is absolutely outrageous. So I'm glad to hear she's healthy. Glad you're back on the show, Dalton, because we have a lot to get to, man, in this week's edition of the People's Panic Meter.
Would you say it's time for everyone to panic?
Yes, I would, Kent.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening.
No. Wait.
Everybody stay calm. Stay calm.
What's the procedure?
Stay calm.
Reminder, how things go here. We try to assign a degree of panic here to the people's who you all send in the People's Panic Meter. We have no panic, some panic, total panic, and coping corner. Before we get into the people's submissions this week, Dalton, and I will say, I called out the people on the recap episode with Andy. I said I was disappointed by last week's email submissions. The people absolutely brought it. We got a ton of emails. We got a ton of really good emails. So I don't want to waste a ton of time on this, but we do have to kind of give a state of the coping corner address first. For people who are new or unfamiliar or just straight up forgot, the coping corner is basically where we put players, like, we're not saying it's over for these players, but they're not going to reach the ceiling that they were drafted to be. The biggest thing is we're not going to continue to talk about these players because it just kind of is what it is. Basically, I view the coping corner as it is what it is kind of status, not like there's no more panicking anymore. You're just at the accepting. You're at the coping zone, which is why it's called the coping corner. So right now, the entire LA Rams offense, Mark Andrews, Tank Dell, Keenan Allen, and the entire Browns offense is in the coping corner. And I did say, Dalton, that we were going to look like jackasses for having that many players in the coping corner. We kind of look a little bit like jackasses right now because there are 4 combined touchdowns in the coping corner from last week. And that is with the entire LA Rams offense being on bye and the entire Browns offense. I mean, LOL, not scoring a touchdown. Touchdown for Mark Andrews, a touchdown for Tank Dell, and 2 touchdowns for Keenan Allen. So, Dalton, we're going to 100% be adding some names to the coping corner this week, but are we taking any out? Do you want to take any names out of the coping corner from this crop of players?
The volume still wasn't there for Andrews or even Keenan. Tank Dell did lead Houston in targets. I will probably be ranking him as a fantasy starter this week without Nico Collins and against Green Bay, Harmon. But you can convince me. I'm going to, rely on you because is he healthy still? I mean, it was, a touchdown in the red zone. I don't know. I think with the volume and given CJ Stroud in the matchup, I could see an argument to remove Tank Dell, but it just doesn't look the same still as last year.
Yeah, see, that last point is kind of where I'm at here too. I posted the clip from the last People's Panic Meter episode about Tank Dell on the internet, and of course, after he scores a touchdown in the first 2 seconds of the game, people are chirping at me as if that was the point. Because not to mention, we recorded that podcast before we knew that Nico Collins was going to be placed on IR. Like, the question is not, is Tank Dell a fantasy starter? Tank Dell is a fantasy starter without Nico Collins in the mix because the targets are going to get concentrated. They're not going to suddenly start throwing a bunch of passes to John Mechie or Xavier Hutchinson or any of these guys, right? It's going to go between Diggs and Dell and Dalton Schultz, although Dalton Schultz did not get it home in the box score in this game. But to answer your question about does he look right? No, he still doesn't look like the player from last year. I went back and charted that film this morning, and he's definitely still not all the way back. Like, him catching a bunch of short passes, which is primarily what he did in this game. They made an effort to get the ball in his hands. He caught a couple passes in the red zone, including that touchdown. But the explosiveness is not there. He's not all the way back from I'm just dropping bangers down the field consistently from a separation standpoint. So, yeah, I mean, if you're chirping at me about Tank Dell in the coping corner or saying he's not healthy, I did say he could get healthy at any point and get right at any time. But because I still haven't seen that player yet, I think we leave him in the coping corner for 1 week because the point of the coping corner, again, is not we're never playing this guy in fantasy. It's just they're not going to reach the theoretical ceiling that they were probably drafted to have. And I still think the ceiling for Tank Dell is lower. Like, you weren't hoping for 7 for 57 or whatever he gave you, you're hoping for like explosive plays from Tank Dell. I still think based on the film, that's not really on the table at this point. But as I said, he can be removed from the coping corner at any moment when we start to see the evidence on film that he is that guy.
Cool, totally fair. And then on the others, no Andrews or Allen and the Browns. Touchdowns aside, I don't think they did anything too encouraging to be removed from here.
No, I agree. I will say, let's see what happens with Cooper Kupp about the Rams here on the coping corner, because he's going to practice this week. Cooper Kupp might be back here in week 7. Puka Nacua is not going to be back most likely until at least week 8. So if Kupp is going to play this week, I think we take the Rams out of the coping corner because they're kind of back on track there. But again, I'm going to give it one more week. So the coping corner stays as it is for now, and we are definitely going to be adding some players this week. Let's get into the submissions for the People's Panic Meter. And hilariously, our first 2 submissions are about 2 Lions players. But I wanted, which is great because they're coming off a 47-point outing, which this is classic. Whenever there's a blowout, Dalton, there's always people upset that their guy didn't quite do enough. 47 points and this player isn't, the wide receiver 1 on the week. What the hell happened? Let's get into this one from Eric first. And you'll see why I wanted to start with this one. Eric sends in, I'm bordering on panic that Amon-Ra St. Brown will end the season merely okay. This week's late touchdown is cosmetics on another mediocre game from a first-round pick. Considering the Lions' run game is dominant, the defense is sound, and the competition for targets has, you know what? I'm actually panicked about something else now that I think about it as I type. I'm panicked about the state of the hobby. I'm panicked that we all trust teams who lie to us and base those lies, start or worse, draft players based on those lies. Cough, cough, CMC. I'm panicked about the randomness and the frequency of in-game concussions and injuries, the last second too late to replace inactive announcements, and the general idea that luck determines the champions from the others. Should fantasy football as a pastime be put in the coping corner in the sense that we just accept that a significant element of the game is luck, and there's little that we can do to mitigate that? Thank you. Signed, an anonymous tight end from Iowa. I have no panic about Amon-Ra St. Brown, Dalton. I don't know if you do either, but should we address the idea that that fantasy football itself needs to be put in the coping corner?
Believe me, I know it's incredibly frustrating. It's hard to predict this stuff and injuries and last minute change of plans. It's been a frustrating year, a hard year for sure for fantasy football managers. St. Brown, Jamison Williams, his first read target share has really dropped since those first 2 weeks, and it looked like he was emerging as the team's number 1. But still, he's a thing. They spread it around. They're a run-first team. The Lions have the lowest neutral pass rate inside the 10 this season. But I'm generally like with you, no panic for St. Brown, other than I would say he probably would get drafted a little bit lower than when he was being taken in draft season. Say, I'd prefer Drake London over St. Brown moving forward, but really that's just nitpicking. I mean, he'll be fine. This offense is absolutely humming along.
As I mentioned, there's always somebody that comes out of a blowout game from a team disappointed with one of the players, right? Just because, yeah, you put up 40 plus points. Usually it's because something else has really gone wrong on the other side and they weren't competitive, especially when it's a back and forth affair. That's entirely different, but they don't have to try to like completely obliterate Dallas on Sunday. So it's honestly kind of nice that St. Brown kind of got rescued by a touchdown later on. But there's going to be games, against Minnesota, against Green Bay, against Houston in the next 4 weeks, where I think it's going to be a little bit more of a back and forth affair. And we know in those games that Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to still be incredibly important. He's averaging 57.8 yards per game. That's obviously well low of what we expected. He was drafted as the wide receiver 4. His current ranking is wide receiver 18. He's already been on his bye though, so a little bit of context there. But overall, no panic for Amon-Ra St. Brown. And look, yeah, man, like I don't know, Eric and people who think this way, I don't know who lied to you. There's luck involved in fantasy football. 100%. There's a little bit of chance involved here. You can process the hell out of this thing and you can get all the stats together, but you're still ultimately playing a game about things you can't control. Like once you set the lineup, it's in somebody else's hands. And yeah, like we try to make good decisions. As I always say on this show, We make suggestions, you make decisions, and we try to make good decisions. You try to make good decisions, but you're just not always going to get it right. It's impossible to always get it right. And even when you do get it right from a process standpoint, the results can still not go your way because that's just kind of how it works. So yeah, it's definitely frustrating, but none of this stuff is new to me, Dalton. It's not as if like in-game concussions and last-minute injuries and stuff like that, or teams lying to us. None of this is new. This is how it goes every year. We just forget that during the offseason.
Yeah, that is a fair point. And every year it seems like the craziest year with recency bias. But yeah, it's good to realize at times just how much luck is involved with this sport. I mean, so much is involved that we don't even like to admit.
All right, next email here also has a Lions player. El Pablo sends in, I picked up Evan Ingram in hopes to sell high because my running back room is struggling. Sam LaPorta had his bye already. Should I hold Sam LaPorta and sell Ingram? That was kind of the plan. I feel like I need to reverse this train of thought. LaPorta just seems to be the third or fourth option on a run-heavy team. They have him blocking so much. I thought I was watching George Kittle. At least they reward George Kittle. I get that touchdown was an expected negative regression, but he's not seeing the target volume I expected. He was my 14th round keeper, so I don't have a ton of draft capital expected value on him. But do I move on from him and keep Evan Ingram, or do I hold the line? Thanks, fellas. Sam LaPorta was drafted as the tight end 1 overall. He is the tight end 14 so far on the season, Dalton. Again, remember, he has had his bye week, so that's worth remembering here. What's the state of the state with Sam LaPorta?
Certainly some panic for me. 10% target share, 14% in zone target share. That's just not essentially getting it done. Dwayne McFarland says he's Tucker Kraft at this point, a low end boomer bust tight end 1 based on his utilization. So that's kind of where we're at. If you, like I said too, with St. Brown, the Lions have the lowest neutral pass rate inside the 10. This team loves running the football. If you want to galaxy brain it here, Harmon, Aiden Hutchinson accounted for the highest percentage of his team's pressure rate by far. And now he's out for the season, so maybe the defense will fall and they'll have to pass more. But really, this is just a situation where LaPorta is on a team that spreads targets, and when healthy with St. Brown, Jamison Williams, and 2 awesome running backs, he's often 5th on that chart. I mean, it was his touchdown was nice this week, but it was his only target of the game. I know game script played a role there, but yeah, there's got to be some panic as the player who was drafted as the number 1 fantasy tight end.
Yeah, I think there's that Kittle comparison is actually pretty good beyond the fact that he said it was because he's blocking and stuff like that. You're always you're gonna chase the big weeks from Kittle. There's gonna be volatility there. There's gonna be big weeks for Sam LaPorta, but there's definitely going to be volatility there at this point. I just really don't know how you get away from that. Right now, I do kind of view him as a bit of a boomer bust tight end. I'm with you. I think some panic is the correct designation. If we continue to get these low scoring games and stuff like that, he might be a coping corner candidate just because it is what it is. I think with LaPorta at this point where he's not going to be the tight end 1 overall. I think that ship has probably sailed because the offense has materially changed. They're so comfortable just running the hell out of the ball because they're great at it. And they have a guy that's a target vacuum in Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I think the addition of Jamison Williams, LaPorta's the biggest loser there, not St. Brown. Even Tim Patrick has started to get involved a little bit, which has been kind of a welcome addition. It's kind of something they needed there in Detroit.
Nice to see Patrick healthy, man. People love him too. That was really nice to see him finally healthy and out there producing. Loved it.
All right, this next one comes in from Rafi. I hate to second guess y'all. Rafi, please, you can always second guess us. But I distinctly remember an insane amount of Cardinals hype on this pod during the preseason. Something to the effect of, quote, the Cardinals offense will win leagues for people. I had the fear you mentioned last week about Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall that we'd never really seen this offense do it on a sustained basis. But your hype pushed me over the line to grab both Cardinals. On that basis, I drafted Kyler Murray and Trey McBride. Both have basically sucked. I know McBride had some decent weeks, but still doesn't have a touchdown. Can we put the whole Cardinals offense in the coping corner? Most importantly, can you identify each soundbite in your panic meter sound intros? We'll put that aside for a second. Let's focus on business here. Kyler Murray, Dalton, QB6. He was drafted to be the QB6 this year. He's currently the QB8 on the year. I don't really have a ton of panic on either of these two guys. Where are you at with the Kyler Murray and I guess Trey McBride too? I just didn't think like McBride really fit here because he hasn't scored a touchdown, but he's been productive. He also missed a game with an injury, so he's the tight end 6 on the season. I'm really not that worried about Trey McBride, so I don't even know if I really want to include him in this, but we can at least talk about Kyler Murray and kind of the state of the Cardinals offense.
Yeah, there's some panic for me with Kyler Murray, and I'll offer my apologies because I know I contributed to that hype on this podcast here. Marvin Harrison Jr., that was scary. He wobbly went down after getting concussed, so he may have to miss some time. But, man, entering last week, Kyler Murray had 1 touchdown after opening drives. I mean, he's just relying on scripted plays. 10.0 YPA on passes 1 through 10, 5.3 on passes 11 and beyond. So, I mean, he's just crazy relying on these scripted plays. Kyler Murray hasn't thrown for 215 yards or more than 1 touchdown in any game this season when not facing the Rams. I mean, it's been inflated, his season stats, and you just look deeper. It's like Harrison Jr. is one of only 2 receivers who have seen go routes or fades on 30% of their targets. Like, it's just weird usage. Kyler needs to run because he can't get more than 6.5 yards per attempt to save his life, it seems. So I'm worried. Yeah, the production's been there, but it's really inflated by that Rams matchup, and now Harrison is injured. Tell me I'm not overly worried because I do have some Murray on some teams, and maybe I'm being overly critical. But to me, I expected growth the year removed from knee surgery, coaching, and instead, if anything, it's like a step back after adding Harrison.
Yeah, there's one league where I have the Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison Jr. stack, and I'm basically just like, I'm finished. I'm screwed. Not gonna be a good year in that particular league. But it's funny because if you look at like a bunch of advanced metrics like success rate, EPA, this is still a top half of the league offense, which I think people would be surprised by given kind of the panic in the fantasy world. I think I'm at some panic with this one too, just because. Look, I guess I can entertain some panic just because the results have been a little wonky. But again, he's still QB 8 on the season. Like, are we really that? He's not gonna. Maybe the ceiling case, right? Like, he's not gonna win people leagues or whatever. But overall, like, he's still certainly a fantasy starter. Got 17 points per game. That's about what you drafted him to be. Maybe you want it. Maybe the ADP got a little crazy here on Yahoo, I guess, QB6, but throughout the industry, like, nobody really ranked him any lower or like higher than this range. So I feel like he's been a QB1, but a non-needle moving QB1, I guess is what I would say for Kyler Murray. I think I'm just at some panic on this. I do think there are some issues in the Cardinals offense that we kind of need to figure out. The Marvin Harrison Jr. usage we need a little bit more diverse of a route tree there. He did get obviously knocked out of this game very early. That's unfortunate. We need some more chemistry from those guys particularly, but I can still see this being a unit that starts a little slow, finishes hot. So I'm only at some panic on this one.
He is running more. That's nice. Feeling healthier this year, but man, averaging just 197 passing yards this season, and that's with adding Harrison. It's just been frustrating, but hopefully Harrison returns healthy, and maybe they change his role a bit. Do you have anything to say on that all go and fade routes deal? I mean, that's not on Harrison, right? I mean, you can only do so much, and that his rankings this year, catchable target rate. He was running hot here. He was tied for the second most touchdown catches entering last week's game, but 59th in receptions, 38th in red zone targets. 35% of his fantasy scoring came from touchdowns. 60% of his targets have been deemed catchable, 74th in the league. So, I mean, do you have any thoughts on that with Harrison? Because I know I'm worried about his speed week 1. We know that's not an issue, but role is.
Role is an issue. I mean, his role is basically like George Pickens from his rookie year, and we're talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison Jr., I mentioned this last week, is basically playing the hardest wide receiver position you can be asked to play.
Yeah, makes sense.
As a day one rookie, which is impressive for him as a player, as a prospect, all that. Like, you can do that because he's Marvin Harrison Jr., is super refined. Like, there are not many other prospects you can just drop them in the X receiver position and running this route tree and all that stuff. But it's going to lead to very volatile production. I think at some point, I'm kind of mixed on Drew Petzing right now, but I liked some of what I saw last year, particularly towards the back half of last year. So maybe this is a team that can figure it out a little bit. They want to kind of be a tough physical team, but I also think they do need to open that passing game up. And I will also mention too, they've played a pretty tough schedule to open things up, right? They get the Bills, the Rams were the weakest defense that they played, and they thumped the Rams, 41 points in that Rams game. Lions, Commanders, 49ers, Packers. I think the schedule could open up at some point and we might get some bigger games. But the ceiling case, I think, for the Cardinals, I'm a little panicked about that, but not fully panicked. I'm just at some panic with this whole situation.
All right. I hope you're right. Hopefully Connor just was a little banged up last week and he returns to health and he's been good. And McBride, yeah, he's still right there, the number 1, 2, or 3 fantasy tight end moving forward. I mean, his target rates have been awesome and the touchdowns will come.
And yes, the panic meter intro sound bites, producer Colin mentions. Kent Brockman, the anchor in The Simpsons, John Barenthal in The Punisher, wait meme, and obviously the Office fire drill scene, which is an absolute classic. Those are our panic meter sound bites for those that were curious. Next one that we've got here comes from Ethan / Oscar Bobo. I'm beginning to think there's something wrong with these Cowboys. Jeez, I wonder what gave that away. Besides CeeDee Lamb, who's going to get his, but maybe not fully return his elite talent and draft position, is anyone worth anything besides desperation flex / injury substitution? I suppose Jake Ferguson could also be an exception, but only because tight end is a barren wasteland. These running backs inspire no confidence. The wide receivers are a toss-up. Dak isn't scoring because the team isn't scoring. This team has been a fantasy playground the past 2 years, but those days feel over right now. On the CeeDee Lamb point, CeeDee Lamb was drafted as a wide receiver 1 overall. He's been the wide receiver 8 this year, so yeah, a little bit below that. Anyways, what's the panic level for the Cowboys? What's the panic level for CeeDee Lamb specifically, and then just kind of Cowboys as a whole?
Yeah, CeeDee, I got some panic just given the state of this offense. I mean, Dak was undefeated against the Lions, had his highest career passer rating against them, and then this week he finished as the lowest scoring fantasy QB. His completion percentage over expectation was in the 10th percentile. I believe it was the second worst catchable target rate of any game this season. So he is struggling. CeeDee still saw a 37.5% first read target rate. That was the 8th best in the league in week 6. And man, their defense struggling. They've allowed the 3rd most points ever over a 4 games at home stretch ever. Their last 4 home games. And the run struggling should theoretically help the volume here. And you flip the Cowboys schedule, maybe try to trade for CeeDee Lamb now during the bye at San Francisco, at Atlanta, Philly, Houston, at Washington. That looks like a pretty good setup for some shootouts. Last year, Dallas fixed their offense coming out of the bye. Maybe they come out with some motion and play action and fix things. But yeah, there's some concern for this Dallas franchise. It looks really something wrong there. But CeeDee only some panic.
Yeah, CeeDee specifically only some panic. And I like that Ethan kind of put Jake Ferguson aside here because I still think Ferguson is a fantasy starter. I think you could make a case that just because tight end stinks, he might be a top 5 tight end on the board. But, as for everybody else, yeah, it's total panic. I mean, it's total panic for Dak Prescott, for all these guys, for the whole Cowboys franchise in general. All right, let's move on to the next one here. Ross from Kansas City. Never before have I been so convinced by a player's talent and so underwhelmed with their production. The stop-start, herky-jerky experience of consistently starting Chris Olave is growing wearisome. I think we hold and hope in redraft, but what about dynasty? Is this the train ride we should expect going forward? Chris Olave is currently he was drafted as a wide receiver 15. His current ranking is wide receiver 46. Look, there are a lot of Chris Olave panic things, and I mean the dude was knocked out of the game with a brutal concussion like right away. Okay, so there's no reason to. I mean, this result alone it's like stupid to panic after this, but he's probably going to miss this week because they play on Thursday Night Football. He has a history of concussions, so who knows how that could go. And I do just want to acknowledge that it does always feel like there's something, right? Like with Chris Olave, there's always, because I can go through the games and be like, there's actually plenty of good quality games here. And this game, he was shut out because of a good defensive game plan. And maybe he was kind of a decoy because he's now not 100% healthy. In week 1, they blew out the Panthers. You just don't get involved in a blowout. That happens. This game, he gets knocked out with a concussion. I get why that's frustrating overall. I don't know. What's our panic level on Chris Olave?
And he was clearly playing through an injury before the concussion. We
Right.
don't believe he was 100%. But at the same time, Shaheed was just flat out targeting him. I mean, so that was a concern. Certainly some panic now dealing with the injury in the short week, as you mentioned. But long-term, nothing to get overly concerned about. Especially, I was kind of impressed with Rattler, man. The snake, he had his moments. I really don't think it'd be a major downgrade if Carr were to miss significant time. Basically, when you drafted Olave, you had a similar bet as Drake London for the season. We were projecting a big growth. London has hit that growth. Olave's taken a step back. So yeah, there's panic obviously merited here. I mean, the fact that he was getting out targeted by his teammate was really concerned. I get your reasoning behind some of his disappointment, and it can certainly get better. But just the usage even before these injuries was certainly discouraging based on how high he was getting drafted.
Yeah, I think I'm at some panic basically. Especially if we're talking about like long term, just because I always say this, like we project growth for these players and sometimes they just level off at like a very good player, which is where I think Olave has been a very good player. I think other guys have maybe taken a leap. Maybe he just hasn't. I don't know that. I'm not ready to say that like just 6 games into his 3rd season that this is all he will ever be. You know, it's funny, like you look at the wide receiver rankings right now in fantasy, we get all gassed up about these young guys and all this and that. And like Jayden Reed is the wide receiver 3 overall. Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors. These guys are top 10 players as rookies, but it's a bunch of like Chris Godwins and Stephon Diggs and, you know, Mike Evans and it's like Terry McLaurin, you know, like sometimes we want to push these old dudes out and these guys can still be super productive players. And also sometimes guys get better throughout the course of their years, course of their careers. So I don't know. That's just kind of how I feel about wide receiver in general. Like we do try to put the cart before the horse sometimes with the younger guys when there are a lot of players who just haven't aged out of the position, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Yeah. Olave, he'll good at football. Let's just see him get healthy.
All right. Let's move on to a couple of Jaguars players here. Alan sends in, hey, Matt, I recently traded for Travis Etienne in my Dynasty League, which I regretted almost immediately. Bigsby earning more work and was already a concern. But now Etienne is dealing with injuries, and Dearness Johnson was more efficient in week 6 than Travis Etienne has been recently. How screwed am I? Travis Etienne is, he was running back 9 in ADP. He is currently the running back 33. Dalton, this is my first candidate for the coping corner, unless you feel otherwise. I think he is a straight shot, Travis Etienne, into the coping corner. Unfortunately, Alan, I appreciate you. Thank you for listening to the show. I do think you're a little bit screwed on this one.
Yeah, a couple things here. Tank Bigsby just looks like the clear best runner on Jacksonville. Leads the NFL in yards after contact per attempt by a mile. Now, Jacksonville does not like to use Bigsby as passing downs at all. He has 1 target on the season and lost a ton of work to Dearness Johnson, presumably because of game script and not because of the lost fumble that Bigsby had on the kickoff. But so Etienne's going to get passing down work when he returns, but he'll be the 1B to the carries on a bad offense. And now he's injured, or a second injury, so not good for Etienne at all. I will not push back on the coping corner.
Yeah, he's just not going to return running back 9 ADP at all. No chance. So he is definitely going to the coping corner is Travis Etienne. All right, let's stick in Jacksonville. Next one comes in from Xavier. While Chicago is a tough matchup, Brian Thomas Jr. had uninspiring production this week. Trevor Lawrence did miss him on a touchdown throw, but it feels like the offense is not running through him as much as we would have hoped. They barely ran the ball all day, but Ingram seemed like the beneficiary of that increased passing volume. Also, with all of their coaching issues, is there a chance that this is a team that will implode at some point and result in a lost season for the playmakers? Would Peterson losing his job help or hurt this offensive environment? Was the matchup against that secondary the main culprit, or do we get over our skis a bit in terms of BTJ's fantasy potential? Should we assume Ingram is the primary target of this offense with a committee of wide receivers sharing the remaining targets behind him? Brian Thomas Jr. is currently wide receiver, or he was wide receiver 40 in ADP. He's currently wide receiver 9. I'm at no panic, Dalton. I will say this, but I wanted to include this submission. One, because Xavier put a lot of time into this one. Secondly, I do think we got over and I'm not saying us on the podcast, but I think some people out there got over their skis on the Brian Thomas Jr. stuff. Like oh, he's going to be the best receiver in this class. I mean, maybe he will be, maybe he won't be, but the guy is definitely still right now a boom bust player. He's a good player, a damn good player, but he's not out there doing what like Marvin Harrison Jr. is doing from a film standpoint, or even like certainly Malik Neighbors, but he's very, very good. But he's still a volatile player that's shown more nuance and technique than I probably would have expected. But, you know, he by the way, he would have had a good game if he just simply caught a touchdown pass that hit him in the hands. That's another point of this too. I still think I view him as a every week wide receiver 3. Like, I think he's somebody that you probably just set and forget at your wide receiver 3 spot. But that doesn't mean there's not going to be down weeks. That's part of that position.
Yeah, last week was especially frustrating for Thomas since Chicago were down multiple corners on the outside, actually. So the matchup was not quite as difficult as it looked like on paper. But as you said, should have caught that touchdown. His fantasy outcome would have looked a lot different. 1 of 4 touchdowns dropped on Trevor Lawrence passes, and wild how much that keeps happening to him. Totally with you here. Thomas is a top 30 fantasy wideout moving forward. And to me, Evan Ingram's return, that hurts Christian Kirk far more. He had really dramatic splits on off the field with Ingram last year, and obviously was pretty quiet in a tougher matchup, but with Ingram's return. So going to have some big games, going to have some down games, but Thomas, top 30 fantasy wideout moving forward. Even if Jacksonville, frankly, they might already be imploding. Was it Trevor Lawrence? Did he hurt our guy Urban Meyer? Was he the reason that he's not coaching? Seriously, what is going on there? By the way, Harmon, I don't know if you've seen that Aaron Hernandez. I'm sure you've seen the clips, but the Aaron Hernandez show, how they characterized Urban Meyer was almost as cartoonish as the clips you've seen of Gronk and Belichick as well. Highly entertaining television program.
I have not seen the Urban Meyer.
They do not have him look too good. They let's say he contributed to Aaron Hernandez's downfall, to say the least. They claim in the show that Hernandez went final year there, and he's like, I'm not ready mentally. You know, I'm the youngest player in the league. I need to go back here, coach. And Meyer's like, don't have a spot for you, kid. I'll lie to the NFL people and say you're a good kid. Go get drafted. That's how the show presents that situation happened. And if that's pretty funny, but it does not make Urban Meyer look too flattering, to say the least.
Incredible. I'm going to have to check that out. I've only seen the outrageous. I got to say, I think the actor who played Bill Belichick, pretty good job. I think he did a pretty good job. And
the Gronk laugh's hilarious. I mean, even if it's so bad it's good, whatever. It's very, very entertaining. It's really, it's funny stuff.
No panic on Brian Thomas Jr. And yeah, I do think that, I mean, Jacksonville is going to implode at some point. There's no question of that. But I think Brian Thomas can still put up some fantasy numbers. I'm overall not concerned. Like, this definitely looked like a matchup that could be problematic for him going into it. Okay, let's take our first break here. We come back. We're going to go through the rest of the email submissions because, like I said, we got a ton, and we'll hit as many social submissions as we can right after this. All right, we're back. Let's get into this one from Marcus. Also want to shout out Barrett, who sent in an email that combined this player and the next one that we're going to hit because they're both Packers players. So let's get into a little Packers talk right here. Marcus sends in, hey guys, this is going to sound dumb as hell because it's obviously Jayden Reed's a great player and there's no panic here. But in this current Packers offense, is he kind of a big play merchant? In a league where we don't start that many players, is his production too volatile to start him over players like Diontae Johnson or Josh Downs, who either have insane red zone usage or insane target volume? Barrett had kind of a similar thought in that, is the Packers passing target distribution going to be too wide to really say that one of these guys is an every week starter? Jayden Reed was drafted as a wide receiver 35, clearly the top Packers receiver drafted, if you remember, back in the summer. And his current ranking right now is wide receiver 3 overall on the season. So, Dalton, where do we stand with this Packers kind of wide receiver room, specifically Jayden Reed?
Jayden Reed's an awesome football player. I did not draft a lot of him because I was worried about his role. I have been so wrong so far. I mean, because they manufacture touches too, and they get him carries and whatnot. But I will say this. Yes, Malik Willis has played 2 games, but Jayden Reed is the wide receiver 46 in expected fantasy points per game next to Tyler Lockett. I mean, he's probably due for a little regression, as I'll say, but Jordan Love, he's getting healthier and they throw the ball around and all that. But I think Jayden Reed is a possible sell high candidate, but he keeps making me look wrong because I don't want to fade him anymore. But the rest of this team is going to spread around. Yeah, Wicks is injured. Watson will have his boom bust games. Dobbs goes from, being suspended to catching touchdowns. So I think this is going to be Tucker Kraft is a top 10 fantasy tight end moving forward, but his target shares definitely is going to have some down games. So yes, there's a lot of mouths to feed in Green Bay, and the receivers will all be limited because of it. Their fantasy upside's limited because of it. If this was condensed, they'd be stars, absolute stars. And Reed has been despite it. So, suffer a couple injuries and then maybe he maintains it. But the volume right now is definitely, not for it's spread out.
Yeah, I'm at no panic on this one only because of what we should be viewing Jayden Reed as. Jayden Reed is probably not going to finish the year as the wide receiver 3 overall. He is going to be volatile. He's a great player, though, as Dalton mentioned. I mean, I've been a huge fan of Jayden Reed dating back to his college reception perception profile, and I've been very encouraged that the Packers are not doing a lot of nonsense with Jayden Reed this year. He has primarily just been a full-time player. They're not playing like Christian Watson over him because he's bigger than him or something stupid like that on 2 wide receiver sets. Jayden Reed is he's number 1 on the team in routes run. Obviously, Romeo Doubs missed some time with the suspension. Christian Watson has missed time, but even Jayden Reed missed some time in last week's game over the Cardinals. He left with an injury there too. So I hear you that Jayden Reed, if people are valuing him as the wide receiver 3 overall, maybe he's a sell high, but still somebody he's a guy that I want to accept that volatility on because you've already seen when he hits, he's gonna literally win you a week. So I'm not panicked on a player that I drafted at wide receiver 35, sure. Becoming the wide receiver 15 as opposed to the wide receiver 3, totally. If that makes sense.
That's a great way to put it. And one final thing on Green Bay, and I want your opinion of. I read a week or 2 ago that Reed had played 0 snaps all season in 12 personnel. And clearly that just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Yeah. You're saying it leads a team in routes, so who cares?
Yeah, who cares? Okay. I mean, they're going to play a bunch of 11 personnel. They're not playing a bunch of 2 tight ends, especially now that Luke Musgrave is on IR. I do think some people in the fantasy industry have gotten a little too carried away with the 2 wide receiver set stuff. Teams still, when they're trying to throw the ball, they're mostly trying to throw it out of 11 personnel. So it's definitely nice when you have a guy who's never going to leave the field, but that's just not going to happen in this Packers offense. If Jayden Reed was never going to leave the field for the Green Bay Packers, he would probably be a top 3 receiver rest of season. He would probably be a top 5 dynasty receiver, but nobody really values him that way. I love Jayden Reed, but I've never had him as a wide receiver 1, even in my rest of season rankings. Even after seeing how he started, I've got him somewhere between wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 35. So that's kind of how I want people to be viewing Reed. And then I think that makes it a little more plausible that okay, you're not panicked about that type of production.
One quick tangent. Another thing that's overblown in the fantasy community is losing work running backs on 3rd downs. Completely non sequitur. Sorry,
totally.
But they just do not see much action as far as catching the ball on 3rd downs. I believe the leader on 3rd down catches over the past decade is Austin Eckler, and he averages per game 0.8 or something. So don't overreact if your running backs are leaving the field on 3rd downs as far as passing down work.
I love that. All right, let's stick on that Packers theme here. This one comes in from Terry. Like I said, Barrett also mentioned this player in his email. Harmon, Dalton, long time, first time. Went all in on Tucker Kraft. Is he playable next week? Thanks. Tucker Kraft was drafted as the tight end 31, the second drafted Packers tight end. His current ranking is this a tight end 4 overall. Dalton, do we have any panic on Tucker Kraft? I think this is a good time to set expectations for one Mr. Tucker Kraft.
No, as we've been saying, he's going to finish as a top 10 tight end this season, but it'll come with some boomer bust weeks given the usage there and all the other options in Green Bay. But it's such a good offense to be a part of, and he's so talented he can take advantage of the opportunities. So that's, he's not going to be the most consistent tight end, but he'll ultimately be a top 10, which is, great in this economy.
Yeah, in this economy, it is good. Third on the team in routes, 129 routes. He's run around on 64.8% of the dropbacks. The thing with him is that he just doesn't get any downfield looks so far. That could change, but his 3.2 average depth of target is very low as Tucker Kraft, and he's averaging over 10 yards after catch per reception. So he's been that safety valve player here because they've unleashed Jayden Reed more downfield. They have to have someone as kind of that check down guy, and that has been Tucker Kraft so far. But still, like you mentioned, in this tight end economy, I do think Tucker Kraft is a guy like to the question, is he playable next week in a potential high scoring matchup against Houston? Yeah, I would say he's playable. I haven't looked at week 7 fantasy rankings, but he certainly is going to rank as a tight end 1 for me this week and probably every week going forward.
Yeah, I'm in one home league. I think I started him over Kyle Pitts this week, and it might cost me the matchup, but that's going to be a headache every week trying to decide between Kraft and Pitts. What disaster.
Total disaster. Okay. This final email comes in from Zach, and this one's going to be tough to say panic on, but I think it's a situation worth talking about. Andy Dalton played okay for a while, but he had 2 god-awful interceptions, one of which was on a very important late game drive. Is there any chance Bryce Young takes back over in the semi-near future and immediately tanks Chuba Hubbard, Diontae Johnson, etc. as fantasy prospects? Are these guys sell-high candidates due to the risk of Bryce Young rising from the dead? Diontae Johnson, wide receiver 33 ADP. He's currently the wide receiver 17. Chuba Hubbard obviously wasn't even drafted inside the top 30 backs. But he's the RB7 on the season so far this year. So these guys are way outperforming expectations, but we know it's mostly been with Andy Dalton under center. So Dalton Del Don, are you panicked about Bryce Young potentially getting back in the mix here?
That would be the only reason to panic at all. And I know Bryce Young did perform a little better when he got mop-up duty last week. So it's possible. I will acknowledge that. But to me, my reading was that Carolina's ready to move on from Bryce Young. And boy, there's nothing to worry about with Dalton. I mean, since Dalton took over, Diontae's number 2 in targets. Hubbard's the number 2 fantasy back. Jonathan Brooks, I believe they just opened the 21-day practice window right before we started recording here. So that's also a concern for Hubbard. But boy, he's looked impressive. And Diontae Johnson's usage in the end zone is just really underrated. It's so funny. This guy went a whole year without scoring a touchdown, and he's like getting targeted the most in the end zone. So wheels up if Dalton says remains starter. But yeah, you would panic if they decided to turn back to Bryce Young. But it's Carolina. I mean, yes, on one hand, they should be playing for the future, but on the other, it feels like Canales is trying to win games now, and they don't view Bryce Young as the long-term solution.
Yeah, 39 quarterbacks have taken 50 plays this year. Andy Dalton ranks 32nd in success rate, and he ranks 26th in EPA per play. Bryce Young, of course, ranks 39th out of 39 in both stats. So I don't know, man. It's like this was the whole point of going to Andy Dalton was to find out what you have on the rest of the roster. Like, see if Diontae Johnson can be a number 1 receiver for you. See if the rushing game can look good. See if Xavier Legette can make plays when called upon. Hey, like Jalen Coker, this undrafted free agent guy, who apparently went to producer Collins High School. So shout out to a Virginia legend, Jalen Coker. This guy's starting to make some plays for them and like continue to get playing time in the offense. So shout out. Like, I think they will stick with Dalton until they absolutely cannot anymore. So I'm honestly I just think I'm riding the gravy train with these guys. Like, yeah, are we eventually going to hit E on the gas tank and we get Bryce Young back out there? Totally possible. But I think for me, in terms of like sell high sort of advice here, I think everybody knows the risk of these players. I don't even think there's that much like name brand value in either one of these guys, either Chuba Hubbard, Diontae Johnson. I think the best move is probably just to ride them as long as you can.
Jatavian Sanders looked pretty good too with Trimble out, the young tight end they have there. But it's a great point, Harmon. Have Dalton to see what they have on these other, because we really didn't see what kind of players they were with Bryce Young. So we are seeing that. I hope they leave Andy Dalton in there, obviously, for all fantasy managers out there, because that would be a disaster and very panic worthy should they turn back to Bryce Young.
Next 4 games for Carolina: Washington, Denver, New Orleans, and then the Giants. There are definitely some tough fronts in there. Not Washington, but like Denver. Saints are a bit of a weird defense, hideous performance from them against the Bucs, but generally they've been a good defense. And the Giants in week 10, they're starting to cook too. So I think there's a chance we get to that week 11 bye and maybe they go back to Bryce Young, maybe, but I think it's going to be a tough sell to the locker room. But then again, they've only won 1 game. So what are we really talking about here? Okay. Let's move on to our social submissions. Again, shout out to you guys, the listeners. You really brought it with the emails. Continue to bring that kind of goodness. That was good stuff. But let's get into our social submissions here. This first one comes in from @RenWells44. I think it's time for Calvin Ridley to take a timeout in the Calvin corner. Of course, he's talking about the coping corner. Ridley was drafted as the wide receiver 32. So not asking much, but somehow He ranks as the wide receiver 68. Obviously, he has a bye week, but he's coming off an 8-target, 0-catch game. And Dalton, I don't know if you watched much of that game, but I certainly did not. That was not the first film I was bringing up here on Monday morning, was the Titans passing game. But I saw Andy Holloway from the Fantasy Footballers had posted the cut-up of all of Calvin Ridley's targets. And to call those targets would be, I think, doing a little bit of injustice to the word target.
Yeah, catch us on 8 targets. Will Levis, it was reported that it required him to take a shot in his shoulder to play the game. It was clear he's not 100%. The sprained AC joint is affecting his throws. He was already shaky to begin with, so we don't need this. Calvin Ridley on the season ranks dead last among 88 receivers in passer rating, wide receiver targeted passer rating, 34.3. He has the second most uncatchable air yards per game. Only Amari Cooper is worse.
Jeez.
And now Hopkins is getting healthier and commanding targets. So yeah, this is coping corner for everyone involved here, because if Levis is going to try to play through this shoulder injury, I mean, if you can't take advantage of a home matchup against the Colts, I mean, when are you going to use Ridley? I mean, it's not good. Not good.
Yeah, Ridley is the only true veteran receiver who has a sub 30% success rate when his team targets him. And again, I don't know that that's all Ridley's fault. I think some of it is. I think Ridley is a mistake-prone player, so there's definitely some drops and misfires and things like that from him on some of those targets. But there's a lot of these passes that Will Levis is not even close on. Maybe we see Mason Rudolph. That doesn't make it any better. They get the Bills in Week 7, so you're not going to start Calvin Ridley against the Bills. You're not going to start him against the Lions in Week 8. Patriots in Week 9, Chargers in Week 10, Vikings in Week 11, Texans in Week 12. Yeah, no, Calvin Ridley is going right to the coping corner. Talk about a situation that is what it is. That is definitely Calvin Ridley here in 2024. This next one comes in from @rich_homie_gels. I'm panicking about DK Metcalf. He held it down for me with Juwan Jennings and Michael Pittman while A.J. Brown was banged up. But now, after 2 games of 6.3 or fewer in half PPR, I'm worried my team will be too reliant on A.J. Brown when it comes to wide receivers, especially with Seattle's schedule remaining. DK, drafted as wide receiver 20. Current ranking wide receiver 14, but as Rich mentions, not so great as of late. Thursday was an especially kind of troubling performance. Where do we stand with DK Metcalf right now, Dalton?
So on one hand, I can see some panic because there are reports that something just seems off, and the arguments with Geno, and there's definitely some reports out there that there's just something in the locker room between the two. That said, I mean, I would probably just disregard that and try to buy low with DK Metcalf. He was 1 inch away from a touchdown Thursday night in the back of the end zone. He had a 52-yard touchdown wiped off the board because of an illegal shift penalty that was unnecessary, didn't affect the play. Seattle has a super high pass rate over expectation. I think the second highest neutral pass rate, the highest pass rate inside the 10. Geno Smith is totally due for touchdown regression here. Our guy JSN it cannot get targeted more than 4 yards down the field. By DK Metcalf, I think he's going to maybe go nuts over the rest of the year.
So you're at no panic with DK.
I mean, I can acknowledge if there's more to this on the outside and there's issues here and there's something I could acknowledge that might be something, but I'm going to ignore it and I'm going to say that he's been unlucky the last couple of weeks. This team's going to start throwing more touchdowns and I have no panic. I think he's going to be fine or more than fine.
Yeah, I'm weirdly at some panic-ish, if that makes sense. Maybe I'll send the graphic in so we can show this on YouTube from True Media. But if you look at the Seahawks passing efficiency, so just success rate on targets and EPA per target, DK is clearly the least efficient of these 3 receivers. And I think a lot of that is just the last 2 weeks and some of these mistakes and stuff like that. But and that's kind of where I'm a little stuck on the DK stuff, because I thought he was a player, like I said, with Chris Olave, who'd kind of leveled off as a very good receiver, but not truly a superstar. And then he has a couple of these monster performances where he's looking fantastic to start the year. I'm man, maybe I was wrong about DK. Maybe he has leveled up this year and Ryan Grubb's offense is really going to get him there. And then I think we've seen something like the same old DK kind of nonsense where a little bit of a body catch at the catch point, doesn't quite play as physical as you want. Will get kind of stuck on the top of routes or make mistakes and drift at the top of routes, stuff like that. I don't know. I'm at just like panic-ish, if that makes sense. Just on like, I think he probably is a wide receiver 2 in fantasy, but is he a wide receiver 1? I'm not quite sure about that. Falcons, Bills, Rams before a week 10 bye for the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, that's fair. But he's drafted as a wide receiver 20, current ranking wide receiver 14. Something's not totally right with Seattle offense, but again, he's been unlucky, and I think Geno is going to throw for more touchdowns moving forward.
All right, this next one comes in from @Lal_R. Matt, I'm considerably worried that Aiyuk's 8 for 147 week was the outlier. We got him with value, or so we thought. Now it just seems like the trap was laid perfectly. Even with ideal scenarios and teammate injuries, he's not consistently earning the targets he was last year. Will he return? Brandon Aiyuk was drafted as a wide receiver 14. His current ranking is a wide receiver 44. Dalton, I really want to say no panic on this one, but what is your kind of state of the state with Brandon Aiyuk?
You know, Harmon, speaking of outlier, if you look at his yards per target, yards per route run, last season does look like the major outlier in his career. It's especially discouraging this is happening without CMC. I mean, Purdy's not targeting Mason. He's going downfield constantly and targeting his wide receivers more than ever by far. And yet Aiyuk is, disappointing. Part of that had to do with, holding out and having the slow start. But man, yeah, this is becoming frustrating, and there's some panic because Aiyuk was aggressively drafted. So especially in some leagues. And yeah, we've only seen production in one game. So there's got to be some panic here.
I think I'm at some panic here, but I kind of have him from a rest of season perspective ranked in line with ADP, wide receiver 15, 14-ish. I think he'll still return that value. It's just going to be a bit of a bumpy ride. And yeah, like anytime you average, what did he have, like 13 yards per target? No that's going to be the outlier of his career. He has like over 3 yards per route run. No kidding. It was
a historic year. You're right. The most yards ever for someone and fewer than 110 targets. So that's fair. That's fair. All right.
But do we suddenly think he's going to return to the whatever his yards per target was when he was in the doghouse in his second season? Like, I think that type of analysis is, I don't know. I don't really know if that's instructive to where we are with the player currently. But at the same time, I don't think he's looked like that guy on film just yet either. Could he get there at some point once we get rocking and rolling? Maybe. He doesn't look bad. He looks fine, but he doesn't look like the transformative player that he truly was on film last year. And I think a lot of that probably has to do with the ramp up to the season and all that weirdness. But we'll see. It might be about to get even more crowded, though. Our guy Ricky Pearsall is getting elevated to the active roster here. So Brock Purdy, who's balling out this year, it has no shortage of guys to throw the football to. That's for sure.
I know. And how fun is it to watch Purdy these days? No one holds the ball longer, throws it deeper, juking out defenders. I mean, Baker Mayfield and Drake May are throwing their hat in the ring too. Is pretty entertaining guys that are unexpected. But Purdy's just become a real fun QB to watch. Maybe I'm biased. You tell me. Is he not?
No,
does he look like Romo 2.0 out there? I mean, he's constantly using his legs and just throwing the ball downfield. I mean, it's a fun style to watch.
I will say it's a fun style to watch. I do kind of think they need to get a little bit back to like the play action and some of the efficiency stuff in this offense, because Purdy is like the best passer rating on play action, but they barely use it anymore.
It's weird that they haven't this year. I know, it's super weird. He was all out of control the last game, the splits. When he did play action, that's when he did all his damage. So yeah, why is that, Harmon? Explain that to.
I don't know, man. Maybe it's the way Purdy wants to play. He has a very backyard style of football, or at least he did in college. But
I've seen that the defense are countering all this motion. The Saints haven't done anything since week 2. Is it that subtle rule change they made in the offseason that the Dolphins and Niners were specifically complaining about, that they felt like they were targeted? I don't know if it's that or the defense has spent the offseasons to really try to stop it, but it feels like the motion. I mean, the Dolphins were struggling when Tua was healthy those first 2 weeks. Feels like the motion and the play action has been countered a bit this year.
Definitely. And I think like the best thing you can do is just run a really good drop back game, which they can, because Brock is good and like all of these players are good. But I think dial back, like let's just mix it a little bit in terms of the chaos stuff and some of the base offense things that we like to see out of San Francisco. I think we can find a happy medium here, and I don't think we've quite found it yet, if that makes sense.
Fair.
All right, let's get to 2 more here before we throw to our last break. This one comes in from @Justin_Tech. Arthur Smith has it in for my dynasty team. For years, I was forced to watch him not take advantage of Drake London, and now it's George Pickens' turn. As Pittsburgh keeps winning with Fields/Smith ball, I'm afraid Pickens isn't going to be fantasy football relevant. Am I overreacting? Russell Wilson, is he going to save us? No, Russell Wilson's not going to save you. Pickens ADP, wide receiver 26, current ranking, wide receiver 45. I will say, Dalton, I'm going to vote for total panic on this one. And look, I hate to always be the Arthur Smith guy. This is not an Arthur Smith problem. This is a George Pickens problems the last 2 games. Running routes at like 60% speed, dropping passes, not making plays in contested situations. Like I love what Pickens put up in the first few weeks on film, but he's like packed it in basically since then. So this is not an Arthur Smith thing. This is simply a George Pickens thing, which is a little bit why I'm in the total panic zone, just because I'm trying to get inside the head of a player that is tough to read.
Yeah, I think it's total panic for either the reason, because I would push back a little and say I think this is someone management. I mean, we're watching Drake London emerge as a full-time star in a bigger role, and I get it. I saw the Warren Sharp film, man. I saw it. I got it. Yeah, and people love and he's dogging it on some routes, but his role is completely reduced. He's the team's best player by a mile, so maybe it's both. Maybe he's dogging it now because of that, and the management's screwing him also. But either way, fantasy managers aren't happy. Whatever the culprit,
or he's dogging it because of management.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's just some circle. But either way, it's not good for fantasy terms. There was like really good matchup stuff against the Raiders last week, and indoors. It was a very good matchup for him, and again, couldn't deliver. So this is he's definitely panic mode.
Yeah, that's my thing though, and the opportunities were there for him to make plays last week, and he led the team in routes. He got 8 targets and he caught 3 passes, and some of those were his. Like, he made 0 contested catches in that game. He dropped at least 1 pass. So yeah, I think like some of this is a Pickens issue too. That's totally my big thing here. All right, final one we're gonna do. This one comes in from at Tober or Wake USF. I don't even know what to say here, but easy answer on this one. Rachaad White is a goner. Buck and Tuck, Irving and Tucker, is the best 1-2 punch the Bucs have had since WD-40. Warwick Dunn and Mike Allstott. Rachaad White was drafted as running back 15. His current ranking is running back 40. Yeah, I'm with this this Twitter handle, Tobler Wake USF Wake Tampa. Something about USF. Okay, Rachaad White is screwed. He is definitely a goner. He is a coping corner candidate for sure.
Yeah, Todd Bowles even came out and said it looks like it might be a 3-headed monster in Tampa Bay.
Oh, great.
He just came out for So he literally said that. So Bucky Irving, I just want to say, he ran cold last week, man. That one target happened to go to Sean Tucker. He could have scored, and Tucker benefited from that final clock-killing drive against an exhausted New Orleans defense. Irving had the run of the day, played 21 more snaps, 14 more routes. Just so happened that Tucker finishes the most fantasy points that week. But yes, that's a 3-headed monster, and White's best chance is just being the passing down back when he returns. But he has 2 far superior ball carriers in front of him on his own depth chart.
Yeah, he's not going to totally go away, but there's no shot he's paying back running back 15. So he is an obvious coping corner candidate. So we added Calvin Ridley, Travis Etienne, and Rachaad White to a coping corner that already included the entire LA Rams offense, with the caveat that they're out if Cooper Kupp comes back this week. Mark Andrews, Tank Dell, Keenan Allen, and the entire Browns offense. So Dalton, the coping corner is pretty packed at this point. The only one I'm a little like, we might take this player out pretty soon, is Tank Dell. Everybody else, I feel pretty good about being in the coping corner at this stage.
Yeah, it's my first year doing this pod with you, but I'd imagine it wasn't quite this full this soon last year.
No, which, look, love Andy, hell of a guy. 2 times a week, Barron's on the pod, and all the numbers are up, because when you can get Andy Barron's on the show, I mean, just, you got to do it. But he's a little like, he stuck with his guns a lot on this show last year. He stuck with like the preseason takes, I think, a little bit. You are a man who is not afraid to adjust and not afraid to move with the times and take in current data and react to it, Dalton. Maybe we're going to end up looking like we overreact on this show, but I think that's why a lot of players have been in the You've given me the strength to throw players in the coping corner.
Yeah, you got the green light to bury these fantasy players for sure.
Perfect. That's just what everybody needs. All right. Let's take our final break. When we come back, we're going to get into our waiver wire segment right after this. All right, let's take a look at this week's Waiver Wire Connections presented by Spectrum. Every week, Dalton and I share a large, medium, and small priority player on the waiver wire this week. We try to do it this way to sort of give you a guide on, you want to make sure this is a player you really go hard in the paint for if they're a large priority player. Every individual league is different. That's why we're not going to give out like fab designations unless we really feel some type of way about it. Every league does different priorities on the waiver wire. It's hard to give like one size fit all advice on the waiver wire, but sort of, again, just level some expectations for these players. Try to sort of, we'll flesh that out as we give these individual recommendations and everything. But that's sort of the impetus of this this particular segment here. And look, we're not going to go through all the players on the waiver wire because it's not always good players. But we have some interesting options this week. Dalton, get us started with your small priority player here coming out of week 6.
Give me Drake May. He committed 3 turnovers during his debut, but he also threw 3 touchdowns. He led New England in rushing. Houston entered leading the league in pressure rate. May already has more touchdown passes than Jacoby Brissett had over 5 games. The Patriots have a bad offensive line and limited weapons, but May was a big runner in college, and he's on the fantasy radar because of that. He has the second highest scramble rate after one game. Only Jayden Daniels is higher. The rookie gets a Jacksonville defense this week that's allowed an NFL high 14 touchdown passes and the most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Harmon, Drake May was fun to watch, and he's available in 94% of Yahoo leagues.
I dig it. I'm going to stick in the Patriots offense with my small priority player. We'll talk about Demario Douglas. Demario Pop Douglas, of course, 7% rostered in Yahoo leagues. He was fourth on the team in routes run in week 6 in Drake May's debut, but he was number 1 in targets by a lot. Targeted on 31% of his routes according to Fantasy Points data. Douglas is an interesting player. He's definitely a slot-only guy, but he's like weirdly a man coverage beating receiver. Hey, the Jaguars play a ton of man coverage and are not very good at it. So I think Pop Douglas can get loose a couple times here in week 7. So, I don't think he has a ton of upside necessarily as a player, which is why I'm only going to have him as a small priority guy. But clearly he was Drake May's favorite target. I do think he's a pretty good player. So maybe he can give you some wide receiver 3 weeks and help you through the bye weeks if Drake May continues to put together some good film. Because I'm with you, Dalton. I liked what I saw out of Drake May in week 6 in his first start. Give me your medium priority player here for this week.
Oh, Sean Tucker, man, he just finished as the top overall fantasy scorer in week 6 while rostered in just 1% of Yahoo leagues. Bucky Irving remained Tampa Bay's lead back, but Tucker split carries evenly, and he certainly needs to be added in fantasy leagues after that performance. It's definitely possible this quickly turns into a 3-headed monster once Rachaad White returns, but there's upside here with the Bucs suddenly averaging the second most points in the league. Grab Tucker and see what happens.
I love that. Just grab him and see what happens, man. Because yeah, right. Like Dalton, how many scenarios are there where Sean Tucker just never gives you a week like that again? Probably like 10 out of the 10 scenarios is that's never going to happen again. But still, like you want a back like this just in case there are further injuries. Because clearly, after what we saw, that guy can play.
Totally, yeah. And like I said, this environment, they're just putting up a bunch of points each week too. So yeah, he might be completely wasted, but he's definitely worth stashing and finding out what happens over the next few weeks for sure.
Yeah, look, this is a team that's needed to run the ball bad over the last 2 years. So if Tucker can be part of the solution, I don't see why the team would just go away from him just because of a guy that they, invested like a day 2 draft pick in Rachaad White not that long ago. So I think Tucker's got some potential here. Definitely Bucky Irving is probably still the RB1 of this team, but Tucker it should be on rosters. Another guy who should be on rosters, but is not his starter, is my medium priority player, Kimani Vidal. 11% rostered is the Chargers rookie running back. Ripped off a big play as a pass catcher on a wheel route touchdown from Justin Herbert. This is a team that wants to run the ball. Like, I don't think he's going to take J.K. Dobbins' job, is Kimani Vidal, but he looks like he's clearly the running back 2 behind the veteran running back J.K. Dobbins because Gus Edwards is on IR. And look, Dobbins is a guy, I knock on wood, cross your fingers, whatever, because it's such a fun story to see him healthy. He perfectly fits this man gap scheme run style that they want to do there in LA, but he's a guy that's dealt with injuries constantly. He's never played more than 8 games in an NFL season. Kimani Vidal has some talent. He's got some juice. He could be a big play asset for a team, like I said, that wants to run the ball. So bare minimum, like is his outlook that much different than like a Blake Corum And I think Vidal might actually get on the field more, but people still roster Corum because it's like, oh man, if anything happens to Kyren Williams, like we're going to set up to rock here with Blake Corum if anything happens to Kyren Williams. I feel like the same you can pretty much say for Kimani Vidal, except he'll probably give you some standalone weeks too.
Vidal also might just be a much better player than Blake Corum, who scored. I think he scored all his touchdowns but one inside the 5-yard line and has not impressed at the pro level. Meanwhile, J.K. Dobbins had never had more than 17 or 18, I can't remember which one, carries in any game in his career before 25 this last week, Harmon. So, how long can he hold up, coming off two serious surgeries, multiple surgeries. So I love the Vidal call. My large priority ad is Isaac Guerendo. Hopefully I can say his name right even this week. My Niner guy, Jordan Mason, day-to-day with a shoulder sprain. Mason has been fantastic, but he already set a career high in NFL carries by week 2 this season. Mason never had 175 rush attempts in college. Patrick Taylor would see work should Mason miss time. But Guerendo is an elite athlete, top 40 speed, and a Kyle Shanahan offense. So there's just massive fantasy upside should he get an opportunity. Even if Mason makes a quick return, Guerendo is well worth just stashing in fantasy, man. I've been saying it for a few weeks, and he's available still in more than 95% of Yahoo leagues.
Yeah, there's a chance Jordan Mason misses multiple weeks, right? And this is a high-scoring game on the docket with Kansas City in Week 7. We're probably ranking Guerendo as a fantasy starter there. And then week 8 against the Cowboys, like if there's even a 15% chance that this guy could start in week 8 against the Cowboys before the 49ers bye week in week 9. Yeah, I don't know what the fab recommendation would be, but like say you're a team, Dalton, that's kind of in the middle of the pack in your league and you just need wins and you don't have running backs. Like, yeah, you could be pretty aggressive even if you just get 2 starts out of this guy.
Yeah, man. Again, Patrick Taylor would see some work, especially on passing downs, but Guerendo's this rookie with a ton of explosiveness. You saw him nearly take it to the house. It's unclear if he went down on his own on that horrible football decision, by the way, Harmon. I mean, What are you doing? I mean, that's so Shanahan, him telling him to go down when a field goal would have just made it an 8-point game and Seattle would have got the ball back with 38 seconds left. A totally bizarre decision to go down if he did it on purpose. But dude has speed in that offense. If Mason misses time, I mean, Guerendo is a fantasy starter, period.
My large priority player and a guy that I kind of think is a fantasy starter. So
I like this one. You stole it from me. I like it.
It's Juju Smith-Schuster, who is 32% rostered, more than any of the other players we just talked about. But bro, 32% rostered is too low for Juju Smith-Schuster. I never thought I'd be caping up for Juju Smith-Schuster in the year 2024, but I am, okay? Because what we saw the game before the bye for the Kansas City Chiefs is that Juju is not as explosive anymore as he used to be, and he's definitely not as explosive as Rashee Rice. But he can run those same exact routes against zone coverage, and he can be open, and he is trusted by this coaching staff. He is going to be the wide receiver that leads the team in targets, I think, the rest of the way for the Kansas City Chiefs. Maybe Xavier Worthy comes out of his bye with a little bit of a bump here, and he gets rolling. I think that's totally possible. Not 100% sure if he can be that. He's not going to earn targets in the same area as Juju or where Rashee Rice was. That's not his game. But that's always been Juju's game. Juju is the player I've compared Rashee Rice's rookie year reception perception profile to. He's playing that role right now at this point. We got matchups against the 49ers this week. Definitely could be an interesting high-scoring game there. The Raiders in week 8. Juju is definitely a fantasy starter against the Raiders. Then the Bucs in week 9. Juju Smith-Schuster has never been a good man coverage beater, but all he's ever done is thump zone coverage. The Bucs play a ton of zone coverage, so Juju could easily get home in this one. Dalton, 32% is simply just, it's too low for Juju, who, again, could probably start for a lot of fantasy teams out there.
He's Mahomes' number 1 wide receiver now. Yes, maybe the huge upside isn't there. He's not Rashee Rice, but I would go big. And if you're in a PPR league, Juju is going to rack up the catches moving forward.
All right, this has been the Waiver Wire Connections on the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast presented by Spectrum, and that is going to do it for today's show. Dalton, appreciate you, buddy. We got a little Niners talk in there between Purdy as this generation's Tony Romo and Isaac Guerendo. So I'm sure you're feeling pretty good about that with your guys there.
Yeah, good times, Harmon. Yeah, big matchup against the Chiefs coming up here, Super Bowl rematch. So looking forward to that one. And as always, great times talking ball with you, Harmon.
As always, buddy, we will see you next week, and we'll check in on the Coping Corner and how we did after a disastrous week for the Coping Corner and the reverse jinx successfully applied on Tank Dell. For now, that is going to do it for today's show. On Wednesday, Sal Vetri joins me for the post week 6 data dump. We tell you the stats you need to know heading into week 7 and what to do about your fantasy teams. Until then, we are out.